Today we are starting quadrant 3. So when we get to quadrant 3, we start to think about the line of thinking or the author's message. And so one phrase that we've heard a couple times in this book is all's well that ends well. And what that means is that something might start out as a bad situation, but then it ends up to be okay. And so that's what we're going to look for examples of. So for example, I wrote one down. Everyone thinks that Uncle Feather flew out the window, but he was actually in the house the whole time. So what started out as to be a bad situation actually ended up to be okay. So what I want you to do in your notes is to think of what has already happened. So a couple more. What's already happened that started out not a good situation, or Peter thinking it was not a good situation, but it's actually turned out to be okay. So try to think of 2 and write those down. You can write the one I wrote, 2 more. And then as you listen to chapters 10 and 11, try to think of at least one more example of how something might have started out bad, but turned out to be okay. Chapter 10, Greengurgling Gas. On Wednesday, Sheila got a phone call during breakfast. As soon as she hung up, she started bawling. "What's wrong, honey?" Fudge asked. "My friend, Mouse Ellis, has the chicken pox and can't come to Maine." Grandma put her arms around Sheila. "You must be terribly disappointed." "I am," Sheila wailed. "Everything happens to me." "Why does it have to be my friend who gets sick? Why couldn't Jimmy Fargo get the chicken pox?" "Jimmy had chicken pox in 2nd grade, I said. Don't you remember? We all had them." That made Sheila cry even harder. "But it's so unfair." "Where is it written that life is fair?" Grandma asked. "It's all ups and downs, isn't it, Buzzy?" Buzzy Sr. nodded. "These things happen," he told Sheila. That's when I burped. I didn't mean to, but it just came out. Probably I drank my orange juice way too fast. But Sheila glared at me. "I heard that, Peter." "Heard what?" I asked. "That laugh." "That wasn't a laugh, it was a burp." Sheila turned to Buzzy Sr. "Grandpa, make him stop. He is so mean. He's glad Mouse can't come to Maine." Before I had the chance to explain, Tootsie flicked a spoonful of oatmeal across the table. It landed on Sheila's face, halfway between her mouth and her eyes. "You see," Sheila cried, "you see how everything happens to me?" "It's just oatmeal," Grandma said, handing Sheila a piece of paper towel. "That's not the point." Sheila turned and ran from the room. I sure hoped things would improve before tonight when Jimmy Fargo got here. After breakfast, Mom helped get my room ready for Jimmy. She moved Fudge's things down the hall into the room Grandma is sharing with Tootsie. She set up a rollaway bed for Fudge right next to Tootsie's crib. "I hate crowding you like this," Mom said to Grandma. "I don't mind," Grandma said. "Sleeping in the same room as my grandchildren is a privilege. It's a lot more fun than sleeping in a room by myself." "You should get married, Grandma," Fudge said. "Then you wouldn't have to sleep in a room by yourself." He jumped on the rollaway bed. "That bed is not designed for jumping," Mom said. "It's going to collapse if you don't stop." Fudge tumbled off the bed like some Olympic gymnast and landed on his feet. If I tried, I'd probably break a leg. "Do you still snore, Grandma?" he asked. "Fudgy," Mom said. "That is not a polite question." "But Grandma doesn't mind," she said. "I really don't know, Fudge. You'll have to tell me." "Snoring keeps the monsters away," he said. "Yes," Grandma said. "I'm sure it does." Fudge began jumping back onto the rollaway bed, and he bounced up and down singing. "Fudgy," Mom warned. But it was too late. Both ends of the rollaway bed sprang up, catching Fudge in the middle. I imagine the headline in tonight's paper. 5-year-old flattened by rollaway bed. Get me out of here, Fudge yelled. Okay. Mom and Grandma held the bed apart, and I pulled him out. Dumb bed, Fudge cried, kicking it. If you do that to me again, I'm going to chop you up in little pieces. Let's not blame the bed, Mom said. Later, when we were out in the backyard, Fudge told Buzzy Sr. what had happened. Those beds can be very tricky, Buzzy Sr. said. Fudge nodded. Then, out of nowhere, he said, Do you snore, Buzzy? I used to snore, Buzzy Sr. said, as if Fudge's question were perfectly natural. But since I sleep alone now, I really don't know. How come you sleep alone? Because my wife died. Fudge got this serious look on his face. You could tell he was thinking hard, but after a minute his face lit up and said, You should marry my grandma. Fudge, Mom said. Well, they're best friends, Fudge told her, like Pete and Jimmy. And Jimmy's going to stay the night over at Pete's place, right? Buzzy Sr. and Grandma looked at each other and laughed.